What's going on, everybody? This is Chris Curls, and this is the Highest Underground Show. Today, I'm going to be reading Chapter 2 out of the Iron Curtain Over America. I tried to upload it over the past couple of weeks, and it took forever to upload. So instead of filming in 1080, I'm filming in 720. So it'll upload faster, and I can do things with faster turnaround. But anyway, we're going to start off Chapter 2. It's called Russia and the Khazars. Now, having traced the knighthood of the Teutonic Order from its origin to its dissolution as a military religious brotherhood, and having noted the development of successor sovereignties down to the obliteration of Prussia in 1945, we must turn back more than 1,000 years to examine another thread, a scarlet one, in the tangled skein of European history. Skein, that's interesting. S-K-E-I-N. It's like the piece of yarn that's around the ball or around a spool, or you can have, a skein of terrible words, like a bunch of words, it means like a thread. In the later years of the dimly recorded first millennium of the Christian era, Slavic people of several kindred tribes occupied the land which became known later as the north-central portion of European Russia. South of them, between the Don and Volga rivers and north of the lofty Caucasus Mountains, lived a people known to history as Khazars. Now, these people had been driven westward from Central Asia and entered Europe by the corridor between the Ural Mountains and the Caspian Sea. They found a land occupied by primitive pastoral people of a score or more of tribes, a land which lay beyond the boundaries of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent under Trajan, and also beyond the boundaries of the Byzantine Empire from 395 to 1453. By slow stages, the Khazars extended their territory eventually to the Sea of Azov, and the adjacent littoral of the Black Sea. The Khazars were apparently a people of mixed stock with Mongol and Turkic affinities. Around the year 600, a belligerent tribe of half Mongolian people, similar to modern Turks, conquered the territory of what is now southern Russia. Before long, the kingdom of the Khazars, as this tribe was called, stretched from the Caspian to the Black Sea. Its capital, Ityl, was at the mouth of the Volga River. In the 8th or 9th century of our era, a Khagan or Chagan, roughly equivalent to tribal chief or primitive king of the Khazars, wanted a religion for his pagan people, partly perhaps because of an incipient tension between Christians and the adherents of the new Mohammedan faith. Muhammad died in 632, and partly because of fear of becoming subject to the power of the Byzantine Empire or the Islamic Caliph, the Caliphate. He adopted a form of Jewish religion at a date generally placed at around 741 AD, but believed by Vernadsky to be as late as 865. According to the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, this chieftain, probably Bulan, called upon the representatives of Judaism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism to expound their doctrines before him. This discussion convinced him that the Jewish faith was the most preferable, and he decided to embrace it. Thereupon he and about 4,000 Khazars were circumcised. It was only by degrees that the Jewish teaching gained a foothold among the population. Now, that's something, because can you imagine getting circumcised when you are grown? And I can't imagine back then, around the year 800, that it was like sanitary and not going to get infected, or that would be that's crazy. Anyway, in his History of the Jews, Professor H. Graetz gives further details. He says, quote, "A successor of Bulan, who bore the Hebrew name of Obadiah, was the first to make serious efforts to further the Jewish religion. He invited Jewish sages to settle in his dominions, rewarded them royally, founded synagogues and schools, caused instruction to be given to himself and his people in the Bible of the Talmud and the Talmud." He caused instruction to be given to himself and his people in the Bible and the Talmud, and introduced a divine service modeled on the ancient communities. Now, I'm just going to let y'all know most people are going to know what the Talmud is who are listening to a channel or to a book like this. However, if you don't, that is the commentary of Jewish rabbis when they're commenting on the Torah and all the books of the prophets in the Old Testament and things like that. And it took their viewpoints, what certain things mean, what they think it means, debates between rabbis throughout history. They've done, it's many volumes. All right, and finishing. So, after Obadiah came a long series of Jewish Chagins, for according to a fundamental law of the state, only Jewish rulers were permitted to ascend the throne. End quote. The significance of the term ancient communities cannot be here explained, for a suggestion of the incorrect exposition and the tasteless misrepresentations with which the Bible, i.e. the Old Testament, was presented through the Talmud, see below in this chapter, the extensive quotation from Professor Gretz. Also in the Middle Ages, Viking warriors, according to Russian tradition by invitation, pushed from the Baltic area into the low hills west of Moscow. Archaeological discoveries show that at one time or another these Northmen penetrated almost all areas south of Lake Ladoga and west of Kama and Lower Volga rivers. Their earliest and permanent settlements were north and east of the West Dwina River in the Lake Ilmen area and between the Upper Volga and Oka rivers, at whose junction they soon held the famous trading post of Nizhny Novgorod. Nizhny Novgorod. You know, everybody's heard of it. These immigrants from the north and west were principally the Rus, R-U-S-S, the Rus, I don't know how they would say it, a Varangian tribe in which in ancient annals considered as related to the Swedes, the Angles, and the Northmen. From the local Slavic tribes, they organized a state known subsequently from their name as Russia, which embraced the territory of the Upper Volga and Dnieper rivers. All right, how do you say that? Dnieper? And the Dnieper rivers, and reached down the latter river to the Black Sea and to the Crimea. Rus and Slav were of related stock, and their languages, though quite different, had common Indo-Germanic origin. They accepted Christianity as their religion. Greek Orthodox missionaries sent to Russia in the 860s baptized so many people that shortly after this a special bishop was sent to care for their needs. The Rus were absorbed into the Slav population, which they organized into statehood. The people of the new state devoted themselves energetically to consolidating their territory and extending its boundaries. From the Khazars, who had extended their power up the Dnieper Valley, they took Kiev, which was an important trading center even before becoming, in the 10th century, the capital of a large, recently Christianized state. Many Varangians had settled among the Slavs in this area, the Ukraine, and Christian Kiev became the seat of the enlightened westward-looking dynasty whose members married into several European royal houses, including that of France. The Slavs, especially those in the area now known as the Ukraine, were engaged in almost constant warfare with the Khazars, and finally, let me see here, get that light, sorry y'all. All right, the Slavs, especially those in the area now known as the Ukraine, were engaged in almost constant warfare with the Khazars, and finally, by 1016 AD, destroyed the Khazar government and took a large portion of Khazar territory. For the gradual shrinking of the Khazar territory and the development of Poland, Lithuania, the Grand Duchy of Moscow, and other Slavic states, see the pertinent maps and historical atlas by William R. Shepard. Anyway, some of the subjugated Khazars remained in the Slav-held lands their Chagins had long ruled, and others migrated to Kiev and other parts of Russia, probably to a considerable extent because of the dislocations wrought by the Mongols under Genghis Khan, who founded in and beyond the old Khazar Khanate the short-lived Khanate of the Golden Horde. The Judaized Khazars underwent further dispersion both northwestward into Lithuanian and Polish areas, and also within Russia proper and the Ukraine. In 1240 in Kiev, the Jewish community was uprooted, its surviving members finding refuge in towns further west, along with the fleeing Russians, when the capital fell to the Mongol soldiers of Batu, the nephew of Genghis Khan. A short time later, many of these expelled Jews returned to Kiev. How do you say? I keep messing up on that word. It's in the Ukraine. Kiev. Kiev. Migrating Thus, as some local power impelled them, the Khazar Jews became widely distributed in Western Russia. Into the Khazar Khanate there had been a few Jewish immigrants, rabbis, traders, refugees, but the people of the Kievan Russian state did not facilitate the entry of additional Jews into their territory. The rulers of the Grand Duchy of Moscow also sought to exclude Jews from areas under its control. From its earliest times, the policy of the Russian government was that of complete exclusion of the Jews from its territories. For instance, Ivan IV, between 1533 and 1584, refused to allow Jewish merchants to travel in Russia. I wonder if that was Ivan the Terrible, because, whenever Jews write the history books, they always, people who were their enemies in the past get shit on. All right. Relations between Slavs and the Judaized Khazars in their midst were never happy. The reasons were not racial, for the Slavs had absorbed many minorities, but ideological. The rabbis sent for by Kak and Obadiah were educated in and were zealots for the Babylonian Talmud, which after long labors by many hands had they completed on December 2nd, 499. In the thousands of synagogues which were built in the Khazar Khanate, the imported rabbis and their successors were in complete control of the political, social, and religious thought of their people. So significant was the Babylonian Talmud as the principal cause of Khazar resistance to Russian efforts to end their political and religious separatism, and so significant also are the modern sequels, including those in the United States, that an extensive quotation on the subject from the Great History of the Jews by Professor H. Gress is here presented. Quote, "The Talmud must not be regarded as an ordinary work composed of 12 volumes. It possesses absolutely no similarity to any other literary production, but forms, without any figure of speech, a world of its own which must be judged by its peculiar laws. The Talmud contains much that is frivolous, of which it treats with great gravity and seriousness. It further reflects the various superstitious practices and views of its Persian birthplace, which presume the efficacy of demonical medicines, of magic, incantations, miraculous cures, and interpretations of dreams. It also contains isolated instances of uncharitable judgments and decrees against the members of other nations and religions. And finally, it favors an incorrect exposition of the scriptures, accepting, as it does, tasteless misrepresentations. More than 6 centuries lie petrified in the Talmud. Small wonder then that the sublime and the common, the great and the small, the grave and the ridiculous, the altar and the ashes, the Jewish and the heathenish, be discovered side by side. The Babylonian Talmud is especially distinguished from the Jerusalem or Palestine Talmud by the flights of thought, the penetration of mind, the flashes of genius which rise and vanish again. It was for this reason that the Babylonian rather than the Jerusalem Talmud became the fundamental possession of the Jewish race, its life breath, its very soul. Nature and mankind, powers and events were for the Jewish nation insignificant, non-essential, a mere phantom. The only true reality was the Talmud, end quote. Now, getting back. Not merely educated by the Talmud, but actually living the life of its Babylonian background, which they may have regarded with increased devotion because most of the Jews of Mesopotamia had embraced Islam. The rabbi-governed Khazars had no intention whatsoever of losing their identity by becoming Russianized or Christian. The intransigent attitude of the rabbis was increased by the realization that their power would be lost if their people accepted controls other than Talmudic. These controls by rabbis were responsible not only for basic mores, but for such externals as the peculiarities of dress and hair. It has been frequently stated by writers on the subject that the ghetto was the work not of Russians or other Slavs, but of rabbis. Yeah, they always say that they put us in ghettos and wherever they live, the Jewish ghetto. That was for a reason, is because the rabbis wanted Jews to be separate from everyone else. So they put themselves in the ghetto. They didn't get put in the ghetto. Okay. Now, as time passed, it came about that these Khazar people of mixed non-Russian stock who hated the Russians and lived under Babylonian Talmudic law became known in the Western world from their place of residence and their legal religious code as Russian Jews. In Russian lands after the fall of Kiev in 1240, there was a period of dissension and disunity. The struggle with the Mongols and other Asiatic Khanates continued, and from them the Russians learned much about effective military organization. Also, as the Mongols had not overrun northern and western Russia, there was a background for the resistance and counteroffensive which gradually eliminated the invaders. The capital of reorganized Russia was no longer Kiev, but Moscow, hence the terms Muscovy and Muscovite. In 1613, the Russian nobles, or boyars, desired a more stable government than they had and elected as their Tsar a boy named Michael Romanov, whose veins carried the blood of the Grand Dukes of Kiev and the Grand Dukes of Moscow. Under the Romanovs of the 17th and 18th centuries, there was no change in attitude toward the Judaiz Khazars, who scorned Russian civilization and stubbornly refused to enter the fold of Christianity. Peter the Great spoke of the Jews as rogues and cheats. That was the Popular History of Jews by Graetz. Another quote is, Elizabeth expressed her attitude in the sentence, "From the enemies of Christ I desire neither gain nor profit. I desire neither gain nor profit. From the enemies of Christ, I desire neither gain nor profit." With the expansion of Russia in the last half of the 18th century, many additional Jews were acquired with the new territory, especially in Russia's portion of divided Poland. The Empress, Catherine II, who reigned from 1762 to 1796, had no choice but to receive the Jews along with other inhabitants of the land. But she created out of the provinces taken from Poland a, quote, pale of settlement, end quote, from which the newly acquired Jews could not move. As before, from that time on, the attitude of the government was to hem in the Jews as much as possible. Under the Romanov dynasty, which was 1613 to 1917, wow, it's 300 years. I knew it was long. I didn't know exactly how long, though. Under the Romanov dynasty, many members of the Russian upper classes were educated in Germany, and the Russian nobility, already partly Scandinavian by blood, frequently married Germans or other Western Europeans. Likewise, many of the Romanovs themselves, in fact, all of them who ruled in the later years of the dynasty, married into Western families. Prior to the 19th century, the two occupants of the Russian throne best known in world history were Peter I, the Great, and Catherine II, the Great. The former, who in 1703 gave Russia its west window, St. Petersburg, later known as Petrograd and recently as Leningrad, chose as his consort and successor on the throne as Catherine I, reigned from 1725 to 1727, a captured Marienburg, Germany servant girl whose mother and father were respectively a Lithuanian peasant woman and a Swedish dragoon. Catherine II, the Great, was a German princess who was proclaimed reigning Empress of Russia after her husband, the ineffective Tsar Peter III, subnormal in mind and physique, left St. Petersburg. During her 34 years as Empress, Catherine, by studying such works as Blackstone's Commentaries and by correspondence with such illustrious persons as Voltaire, F.M. Grimm, Frederick the Great, Diderot, and Maria Theresa of Austria, kept herself in contact with the West. She chose for her son, weak like his father, and later the madman, Tsar Paul I, a German wife. The 19th century Tsars were Catherine the Great's grandson, Alexander I, who reigned from 1801 to 1825. He had a German wife. His brother Nicholas I, who reigned from 1825 to 1855, had a German wife, a Hohenzollern. His son, Alexander II, reigned from 1855 to 1881, had a German wife. His son, Alexander III, reigned from 1881 to 1894, had a Danish wife. And his son, Nicholas II, reigned 1894 to 1917, had a German wife as well. So it seems like the Slavs and the Germans were marrying a lot, which is kind of crazy because, you know, you hear about Hitler fighting the Russians. He was fighting Bolshevism. He wasn't fighting actual Russian, Christian Russians. They had long been killed and taken over, and the country was subverted. So when they say that, know that the Germans and the Slavs do have a common bond through Christianity. Okay, all right. And then the last one, Nicholas II, who was murdered with his family after the communists seized power in Russia. It's like they call it communists. Say it what it is. It's fucking Jews. All right. Through many of the Romanovs, including Peter I and Catherine II, had far from admirable characters, a fact well advertised in American books on the subject, and through some of them, including Nicholas II, were not able rulers. A general purpose of the dynasty was to give their lands certain of the advantages of Western Europe. In the West, they characteristically sought alliances with one country or another rather than ideological penetration. Like their Slavic overlords, the Judaized Khazars of Russia had various relationships with Germany. Their numbers from time to time, as during the Crusades, received accretions from the Jewish communities in Germany, principally into Poland and other areas not yet Russian. Many of the ancestors of these people, however, had previously entered Germany from Slavic lands. More interesting than these migrations was the importation from Germany of an idea conceived by a prominent Jew of solving century-old tension between native majority population and the Jews in their midst. In Germany, while Catherine the Great was Empress of Russia, a Jewish scholar and philosopher named Moses Mendelssohn, from 1729 to 1786, attracted wide and favorable attention among non-Jews and a certain following among Jews. His conception of the barrier between Jew and non-Jew, as analyzed by Grazel, was that, quote, the Jews had erected about themselves a mental ghetto to balance the physical ghetto around them, end quote. Mendelssohn's objective was to lead the Jews out of this mental ghetto into the wide world of general culture, without, however, doing harm to their specifically Jewish culture. The movement received the name Haskalah, which may be rendered as enlightenment. Among other things, Mendelssohn wished Jews in Germany to learn the German language. The Jews of Eastern Europe had from early days used corrupted versions of local vernaculars written in the Hebrew alphabet, how Yiddish came to be, that was by Grazel, just as the various vernaculars of Western Europe were written in the Latin alphabet, and to further his purpose, Mendelssohn translated the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, into standard German, using, however, the accepted Hebrew alphabet. Thus, in one stroke, he led his readers a step toward westernization by the use of the German language and by offering them, instead of the Babylonian Talmud, a portion of scripture recognized by both Jew and Christian, which is the Torah, the first 5 books in the Bible. But no! They had to do the Talmud. All right. The Mendelssohn views were developed in Russia in the 19th century, notably by Isaac Bear Levinson, the Russian Mendelssohn. Levinson was a scholar who, with Abraham Harkavy, delved into a field of Jewish history little known in the West, namely the settlement of Jews in Russia and their vicissitudes during the Dark Ages. Levinson was the first to express the opinion that the Russian Jews hailed not from Germany, as is commonly supposed, but from the banks of the Volga. All right, let me see here. This hypothesis, corroborated by tradition, Harkavy established as a fact, and the Jewish Publication Society of America. All right, and guys, these things are listed on here. This guy does a really good job of listing all of his sources of where he gets stuff, and I can go through and put some in the descriptions so that y'all can, just go buy the book. I mean, like, support the dude, even though he's dead. I mean, this is passing this kind of information along to people will hopefully open people's eyes. You never know. It's very rare. I mean, out of every 10 people, 1 might respond well to it, but you got to keep trying. Those ones, I mean, I'd rather have 1,000 people like us than 1 million half-ass people with no passion and no drive and no commitment. And all right, let's get back. The reigns of the 19th century Tsars showed a fluctuation of attitudes toward the Jewish state within a state. In general, Nicholas I had been less lenient than Alexander I toward his intractable non-Christian minority, but he took an immediate interest in the movement endorsed by the highly respected Levinson, for he saw in Haskalah an opportunity for possibly breaking down the separatism of the Judaized Khazars. He put in charge of the project of opening hundreds of Jewish schools a brilliant young Jew, Dr. Max Lilienthal. From its beginning, however, the Haskalah movement had had bitter opposition among Jews in Germany, many of whom, including the famous Moses Hess, became ardent Jewish nationalists, and in Russia the opposition was fanatical. The great mass of Russian Jewry was devoid of all secular learning, steeped in fanaticism and given to superstitious practices, and their leaders, for the most part, had no notion of tolerating a project which would lessen or destroy their control. These leaders believed correctly that the new education was designed to lessen the authority of the Talmud, which was the cause, as the Russians saw it, of the fanaticism and corrupt morals of the Jews. The leaders of the Jews also saw that the new schools were a way to bring the Jews closer to the Russian people and the Greek church. According to Raisin, the millions of Russian Jews were averse to having the government interfere with their inner and spiritual life by forcing upon them its educational measures. The soul of Russian Jewry sensed the danger lurking in the imperial scheme. Lilienthal was in their eyes a traitor and informer. In 1845, to recover a modicum of prestige with his people, he, quote, shook the dust of bloody Russia from his feet, end quote. Thus, the Haskalah movement failed in Russia to break down the separatism of the Judaized Khazars. When Nicholas I died, his son Alexander II decided to try a new way of winning the Khazar minority to willing citizenship in Russia. He granted his people, including the Khazars, so many liberties that he was called the Tsar Liberator. By irony or nemesis, however, his liberal regime contributed substantially to the downfall of Christian Russia. Despite the ill success of his uncle Alexander's measures to effect the betterment of the obnoxious Jewish settlement, he ordered a wholesale relaxation of oppressive and restraining regulations, and Jews were free to attend all schools and universities and to travel without restrictions. The new freedom led, however, to results the Liberator had not anticipated. Maybe this is the Tsar that they actually assassinated. He granted him all these rights and they fucking killed him, backstabbing bitches. Educated and free at last to organize nationally, the Judaized Khazars in Russia became not merely an indigestible mass in the body politic, the characteristic state within a state, but a formidable anti-government force. With non-Jews of nihilistic or other radical tendencies, the so-called Russians intelligentsia, they sought in the first instant to further their aims by assassinations. Alexander tried to abate the hostility of the terrorists by granting more and more concessions, but on the day the last concessions were announced, a bomb was thrown at his carriage. The carriage was wrecked and many of his escorts were injured. Alexander escaped by a miracle, but a second bomb exploded near him and he was going to aid the injured. He was horribly mangled and died within an hour. Thus perished the Tsar Liberator. Look at what they did. He conceded certain things to him, and then they stabbed him in the back. You have to remember that with these people. Some of those involved, and the thing is, when they do that, it's not a sin. They don't look like they've done anything wrong. They're allowed to do that. That's what the Talmud teaches anyway. All right. Some of those involved in earlier attempts to assassinate Alexander II were of Jewish Khazar background. According to the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, the assassination of Alexander II, in which a Jewish had played a part, revived a latent anti-Semitism. Resentful of precautions taken by the murdered Tsar's son and successor Alexander III, and also possessing a New World plan, hordes of Jews, some of them highly educated in Russian universities, migrated to other European countries and to America. The immigration continued under Nicholas II. Many Jews remained in Russia, however, for in 1913 the Jewish population of Russia amounted to about 6.9 million. Various elements of this restless, aggressive minority nurtured the amazing quadruple aims of international communism, the seizure of power in Russia, Zionism, and continued migration to America with the fixed purpose to retain their nationalistic separatism. In many instances, the same individuals were participants in two or more phases of the fourfold objective. Among the Jews who remained in Russia, which then included Lithuania, the Ukraine, and much of Poland, were the founders of the Russian Bolshevik Party. Quote, in 1897 was founded the Bund, the Union of Jewish Workers in Poland and Lithuania. They engaged in revolutionary activity upon a large scale, and their energy made them the spearhead of the party, end quote. The name Bolsheviki means majority, from Russian Bolshe, the larger, and commemorates the fact that at the Brussels-London conference of the party in late 1902 and early 1903, the violent Marxist program of Lenin was adopted by a 25 to 23 vote. The less violent minority, or Mensheviki Marxists, fading finally from the picture after Stalin's triumph in October 1917. Probably killed them all. It has also been stated that the term Bolshevik refers to the larger or more violent program of the majority faction. After 1918, the Bolsheviki called their organization the Communist Party. The Zionist Jews were another group that laid its plan in Russia as part of the new reorientation of Russian Jewry after the collapse of Haskalah and the assassination of Alexander II. On November 6, 1884, for the first time in history, a Jewish International Assembly was held at Katowice near the Russian frontier, where representatives from all classes and different countries met and decided to colonize Palestine. For a suggestion of the solidarity of purpose between the Jewish Bund, which was the core of Communist Party and early Zionism, see Grazel, who says that henceforth a heightened sense of race consciousness takes the place formerly held by religion and is soon to develop into a concrete nationalism with Zion as its goal, end quote. In Russia and abroad in the late 19th century, not only Bundists but other Khazar Jews have been attracted to the writings of Karl Marx, partly, it seems, because he was Jewish in origin. On both paternal and maternal sides, Karl Marx was descended from rabbinical families, which means he was, pretty important. I mean, like, the rabbis is the most esteemed profession in the Jewish community. All right. The Marxian program of drastic control, so repugnant to the free Western mind, was no obstacle to the acceptance of Marxism by many Khazar Jews, for the Babylonian Talmud under which they lived had taught them to accept authoritarian dictation on everything from their immorality to their trade practices. Since the Talmud contained more than 12,000 controls, the regimentation of Marxism was acceptable, provided the Khazar politician, like the Talmudic rabbi, exercised the power of the dictatorship. Under Nicholas II, there was no abatement of the regulations designed, after the murder of Alexander II, to curb the anti-government activities of Jews. Consequently, the reaction to those excesses was Jewish support of the Bolsheviks. The way to such support was easy, since the predecessor organization of Russian communism was the Jewish Bund. Thus, Marxian communism, modified for expediency, became an instrument for the violent seizure of power. The communist Jews, together with revolutionaries of Russian stock, were sufficiently numerous to give the venture a promise of success, if attempted at the right time. After the rout of the less violent faction in 1903, Lenin remained the leader. The blow fell in the fateful year 1917, when Russia was staggering under defeat by Germany, a year before Germany in turn staggered to defeat under the triple blows of Britain, France, and the United States, which the Jews in Germany stabbed Germany in the back because Germany was winning against Britain. And the Jews, rich Jews in Germany, talked to the rich Jews in America. I mean, not Germany, but the rich Jews in England talked to the rich Jews in America and get them to come fight in the war and to start putting propaganda in through all the newspapers and the media outlets and everything that they controlled to try to convince people to get into the war and to go help England out. And that's why Germany was defeated, is because their own Jews stabbed them in the back. And so they're all working together throughout these three countries. And it goes to show you they don't have any loyalty. All right. The great hour of freedom struck on the 15th of March 1917 when Tsar Nicholas's train was stopped and he was told that his rule was at an end. Israel and Russia suddenly found itself lifted out of its oppression and degradation. At this moment, Lenin appeared on the scene after an absence of 9 years. The Germans, not realizing that he would be anything more than a troublemaker for their World War I enemy, Russia, passed him and his party, exact number disputed, about 200, in a sealed train from Switzerland to the Russian border. Yeah, so that's true. The Germans did send Lenin in a train out of Germany safely to get into Russia to, I don't know, maybe he thought he was going to go over there and weaken the country to get him out of there. I don't know if he knew he was he knew that Lenin was Marxist and a Bolshevik then. I'm not sure. I have to look into that. But in Lenin's sealed train, out of a list of 165 names published, 23 are Russian, 3 Georgian, 4 Armenian, 1 German, and 128 Jewish. At about the same time, Trotsky arrived from the United States, followed by over 300 Jews from the East End of New York, and joined up with the Bolshevik Party. Thus, under Lenin, whose birth name was Ulyanov and whose racial antecedents are uncertain, and under Leon Trotsky, a Jew whose birth name was Bronstein, a small number of highly trained Jews from abroad, along with Russian Judaized Khazars and non-Jewish captives to the Marxian ideology, were able to make themselves master of Russia. Individual revolutionary leaders of Jewish origins, such as Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Sverdlov, played a conspicuous part in the revolution of November 1917, which enabled the Bolsheviks to take possession of the state apparatus. Here and there in the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, other Jews are named as co-founders of Russian communism, but not Lenin and Stalin. Both of these, however, are said by some writers to be half Jewish. Whatever the racial antecedents of their top man, the first Soviet commissariats were largely staffed with Jews. Now, it says that Lenin wasn't Russian, but he may have been because he was adopted. However, Stalin spoke Yiddish and married 3 Jewesses. So, I got to imagine anybody speaking Yiddish is going to grow up in that environment, raised by a Jew, as a Jew, whatever. So I think Stalin was definitely a Jew. The Jewish position in the communist movement was well understood in Russia. The white armies which opposed the Bolshevik government linked Jews and Bolsheviks as common enemies. The Bolsheviks is just another name for Jews. They controlled the whole Bolshevik party. Anybody tells you any differently is lying, and they need to read the Father Dennis Fahey. He's written a lot of books on this, and one of them it lists all the names of all the leaders of the parties who were started when Bolshevism was beginning to have the revolution. All right, let's get back to the book. All right. Those interested in the ratio of Jews to others in the government in the early days of communist rule in Russia should, if possible, see The Last Days of the Romanovs by Robert Wilton, long the Russian correspondent of the London Times. A summary of its vital passages is included in the foreword to the 3rd edition of The Mystical Body of Christ in the Modern World. That's it, The Mystical Body of Christ in the Modern World. You need to read that. That tells you all about a well-known Irish professor of philosophy and church history. Professor Fahey gives names and nationality of the members of the Council of People's Commissars, the Central Executive Committee, and the Extraordinary Commissions, and in summary quotes from Wilton as follows, quote, according to the data furnished by the Soviet press, out of 556 important functionaries of the Bolshevik state, there were, in 1918-1919, 17 Russians, this out of 556, y'all. 17 Russians, 2 Ukrainians, 11 Armenians, 35 Lets, 15 Germans, 1 Hungarian, 10 Georgians, 3 Poles, 3 Finns, 1 Karen, and 457 Jews. As the decades passed by, after the fateful year 1917, Judaized Khazars kept a firm hand on the helm of the government in the occupied land of Russia. In due time, they built a bureaucracy to their heart's desire. The government-controlled communist press issued numerous and violent denunciations of anti-Semitic episodes, either violence or discriminations. Also, in 1935, a court ruled that anti-Semitism in Russia was a penal offense. Among top-flight leaders prominent in the middle of the 20th century, Stalin, Kaganovich, Beria, Molotov, and Litvinov all have Jewish blood or are married to Jewesses. The latter circumstance should not be overlooked because from Nero's Poppaea, the Encyclopedia Italiano, let me see what it say, to the Montreal chemist woman friend in the Canadian atomic espionage trials, reported the Royal Commission of Government. The influence of a certain type of wife or other closely associated woman has been of utmost significance. Nero and Poppaea, I don't know how to say it, P-O-P-P, it's got the A and E where they write it and they put it together. I don't know. Poppaea? Anyway, let me see here. Nero and Poppaea may be allowed to sleep if their crimes permit, But Section 311, titled Raymond Boyer, Montreal, the report of Canadian Royal Commission, should be read in full by all who want facts on the subject of the corruption of scientists and others working on government projects. In the Soviet embassy records turned over to Canadian authorities by Igor Guzenko was Colonel Sabatin's notebook, which contained the following entries. Quote, Professor, Frenchman, noted chemist, about 40 years of age, works at McGill University, Montreal, is the best of specialists on VV in the American continent, gives full information on explosives and chemical plants, very rich. He is afraid to work, gave the formula of RDX. Up to the present, there was no evaluation from the boss. Contact, Frida, Jewish, works as a co-worker in the International Bureau of Labor, a lady friend of the professor. End quote. In view of the facts furnished above as to the racial composition of the earliest communist bureaucracy, it is perhaps not surprising that a large portion of the important foreign efforts of the present government of Russia are entrusted to the Jews. This is especially notable in the list of current or recent exercisers of Soviet power in the satellite lands of Eastern Europe. Anna Rabinson-Parker, dictator of Romania; Matthias Rákosi, dictator of Hungary; Jacob Berman, dictator of Poland; DM Manuelski, dictator of Ukraine, and many other persons highly placed in the governments of several Eastern European countries are all said to be members of this new royal race of Russia. Of Eastern European origin are the leaders of the 19th century and the 20th century political Zionism, which flowered from the already recorded beginnings at Katowice in 1884. Born at Budapest, Hungary, was Theodor Herzl, author of The Jews' State, who presided over the Zionist Congress, which took place at Basel, Switzerland, on August 29th through the 31st in 1897. Dr. Chaim Weizmann, the head of political Zionism at the moment of its recourse to violence, was born in Plonsk, Poland. Since these top leaders are Eastern Europeans, it is not surprising that most of the recent immigrants into Palestine are of Soviet and satellite origin, and that their weapons have been largely from the Soviet Union and from Soviet-controlled Czechoslovakia. As a number of writers have pointed out, political Zionism entered its violent phase after the discovery of the incredibly vast mineral wealth of Palestine. According to Zionist Misleading World with Untruths for Palestine Conquest, a full-page article inserted as the advertisement in the New York Herald Tribune, it said, quote, an independent Jewish state in Palestine was the only certain method by which Zionists could acquire complete control and outright ownership of the proven $5 trillion chemical and mineral wealth of the Dead Sea. The long documented article is designed by R.M. Schoendorf, representative of Cooperating Americans of the Christian Faiths, by Habib Khatiba. He says, quote, representative of Cooperating Americans of Arab ancestry. Oh, never mind, that's not a quote. So, okay. All right, let me see here. But there is a representative of Cooperating Americans of Arab ancestry. All these are funded by Jews. And by Benjamin H. Friedman, representative of Cooperating Americans of the Jewish Faith. It is convincing. Irrespective, however, of the value of the Dead Sea minerals, the oil flow of Middle Eastern wells is something unbelievable to those familiar with slow-flowing American wells. Also in 1951, oil was discovered in the Negev Desert, an area for which Israeli authorities had so much fervor that they seized it. The dominance of the motive of the self-aggrandizement in political Zionism has been affirmed and denied, but it is difficult for an observer to see any possible objective apart from mineral wealth or long-range grand strategy, including aggression, and a proposal to make a nation out of an agriculturally poor, already overpopulated territory the size of Vermont. The intention of aggression at the expense of Muslim peoples, particularly in the direction of Iraq and Iran, is suggested by the fact that the Eastern European Jews, adherents to the Babylonian Talmud, had long turned their thoughts to the lands where their sages lived and where most of the native Jewish population had embraced the Muslim faith. Any possible Zionist religious motives, such as the hope of heaven which fired the zeal of the Crusaders, is apparently ruled out by the nature of Judaism and is generally understood. The Jewish religion is a way of life and has no formulated creed or articles of faith, the acceptance of which brings redemption or salvation to the believer. This is from, what is that? Religious bodies. I have someone, anyway. All right. The secret or underground overseas efforts of Khazar-dominated Russia apparently have been entrusted principally to Jews. This is especially true of atomic espionage. The report of the Royal Commission of Canada, already referred to, shows that Sam Cohen, organizer for all of Canada, Fred Rosenberg, organizer for French Canada and member of the Canadian Parliament from a Montreal constituency, and Hermina Rabinovich, in charge of liaison with U.S. communists, were all born in Russia or satellite lands. In this connection, it is important to stress the fact that the possession of a Western name does not necessarily imply Western European stock. In fact, the maneuver of name changing frequently disguises an individual's stock or origin. Thus, the birth name of John Gates, editor of the Communist Daily Worker, was Israel Regenstrief. Other name changes of the 11 communists found guilty by a New York jury in October 1949 included Gil Green, born Greenberg, Gus Hall, born Hallberg, and Carl Winter, born Weisberg. All right. Okay, so they changed their name a lot. And you can always tell when someone changes their name and they're trying to hide something, or they're just not being completely honest and not trying to be real. And so why, I go by Chris Curls as a nickname, but it's not hard to find out my last name, Anyway, all right. Other examples of name changing can be cited among political writers, army officers, and prominent officials in the executive agencies and departments in Washington. Parenthetically, the maneuver of acquiring a name easily acceptable to the majority was very widely practiced by the aliens prominent in the seizure of Russia for communism. Among the name changers being Lenin, it was Ulyanov, Trotsky, Bronstein, and Stalin Zhugasvili, the principal founders of state communism. The United States government refused Canada's invitation early in 1946 to cooperate in Canada's investigation of atomic spies, but in 1950, when, despite red herring talk of the chief executive, our atomic spy suspects began to be apprehended, the first was Harry Gold, then Abraham Brothman, and Miriam Moskowitz. Others were M. Sobel, David Greenglass, Julius Rosenberg, and Mrs. Ethel Rosenberg, not to be confused with Mrs. Anna Rosenberg. I think Anna Rosenberg was one of the ones that was assassinated. Well, they were hung or killed for treason, for giving away secrets, to Jews, giving away secrets of the U.S. to Russia. Various sentences were given. Mr. and Mrs. Rosenberg received the death penalty. Let me see here. Mr. and Mrs. Rosenberg received the death penalty. Okay. As of early May 1952, however, the sentence had not been carried out, and a significant portion of Jewish press was campaigning to save the Rosenbergs. Referring to Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, Samuel B. Gaich, editor-in-chief and publisher of the California Jewish Voice, wrote as follows in his issue of April 25th, 1952, quote, "We deplore the sentence against the two Jews and despise the cowardly Jewish judge who passed the same." End quote. In March 1951, Dr. William Pearl of the Columbia University Physics Department was arrested on 4 counts of perjury in connection with the crumbling Soviet atomic spy ring. Pearl, whose father was born in Russia, had his name changed from Otto Pearl, or from Mutter Pearl, to Pearl in 1945. For further details on these persons and others, see Atomic Traitors by Congressman Fred Busby of Illinois in the June 1951 number of National Republic. Finally, the true head of communism in America was found not to be the publicly announced head, but the Jew, Gerhard Eisler, who, upon detection, escaped from America on the Polish SS Battery to a high position of the Soviet government of East Germany. Very pertinent to the subject under consideration is a statement entitled "Displaced Persons, Facts versus Fiction," made in the Senate of the United States on January 6, 1950 by Senator Pat McCarran, Democrat of Nevada, chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Senator McCarran said in part, quote, let it be remembered that the Attorney General of the United States recently testified that analysis of 4,984 of the more militant members of the Communist Party in the United States showed that 91.4% of the total were of foreign stock or married to persons of foreign stock. With more than 9/10 of our more militant communists thus recruited from or allied to foreign stock, and with that stock totaling perhaps not more than 10 million or 1/15 of our nation's population, a little recourse to mathematics will suggest that the employment of the Eastern European and other person of recent alien extraction or connection is 150 times more likely to yield a trader than is the employment of a person of native stock. An authoritative Jewish point of view toward Soviet Russia is explained in the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia in the concluding paragraphs on Karl Marx. According to this source, Jews, quote, recognize the experience of the Soviet Union, home of 6 million Jews, as testimony of the Marxist population on the question of national and racial equality. The encyclopedia comments further on, end quote. The encyclopedia comments further on the striking fact that one country which professes official allegiance to Marxian teachings is the one where anti-Semitism has been outlawed and its resurgence rendered impossible by the removal of social and economic inequalities. And the Jewish people face the post-war world by Alexander Bittelman. The affection of a considerable body of American Jews for Soviet Union is expressed dramatically. Quote, if not for the Red Army, there would be no Jews in Europe today, nor in Palestine, nor in Africa, nor in the United States. The length of our existence would be counted in days. The Soviet Union has saved the Jewish people. Therefore, let the American Jewish masses never forget our historic debt to the savior of the Jewish people, the Soviet Union. End quote. Be it noted, however, that Mr. Bittelman admits indirectly that he is not speaking for all American Jews, particularly when he assails as reactionary the non-democratic forces in Jewish life, such as the Sulzbergers, Rosenwalds, and Lazarons. The Sulzbergers own the New York Times. I think that's the family. I forgot his name. Starts with an O. Sulzberg. In addition to ideology, another factor in the devotion to their old homelands of so many of the newer American Jews of Eastern European source is kinship. According to the American Zionist Handbook, 68 to 70% of Jews have relations in Poland and the Soviet Union. Quite in harmony with the Bittelman attitude toward the Soviet was the funding of the Canadian Royal Commission that the Soviet Russia exploits fully the predilection of Jews toward communism. It is significant that a number of documents from the Russian embassy specifically note Jew or Jewess in entries on their relevant Canadian agents or prospective agents, showing that the Russian fifth column leaders attach particular significance to this matter. In view of the above quoted statement of a writer for the great New York publication, the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, which is described on its title page as authoritative, and in view of the findings of the Canadian Royal Commissions, not to mention other facts and testimonies, it would seem that no one should be surprised that certain United States Jews of Eastern European origin or influence have transmitted atomic or other secrets to the Soviet Union. Those who are caught, of course, must suffer the fate of spies, as would happen to American espionage agents abroad. But in the opinion of the author, the really guilty parties in the United States are those Americans of native stock who, for their own evil purposes, placed the pro-Soviet individuals in positions where they could steal or connive at the stealing of American secrets of atomic warfare. Wow. This guilt, which in view of the terrible likely results of the atomic espionage is really blood guilt, cannot be sidestepped and should not be overlooked by the American people. The presence of so many high-placed spies in the United States prompts a brief reference to our national habit in regard to immigration. On December 2nd, 1823, President Monroe proclaimed in the famous doctrine which bears his name, the Monroe Doctrine, that the American government would not allow continental European powers to extend their system in the United States. At that time and until the last 2 decades of the 19th century, immigration brought us almost exclusively European peoples whose ideals were those of Western Christian civilization. These people became helpers in subduing and settling our vast frontier area. They wished to conform to rather than modify or supplant the body of traditions and ideals summed up in the word America, which is a people and an ideology and is a race. You can't be Somalian and be American. I'm sorry, you can't. After 1880, however, our immigration shifted sharply to include millions of persons from Southern and Eastern Europe. Almost all of these people were less sympathetic than predecessor immigrants to the government and the ideals of the United States, and a very large portion of them were non-Christians who had no intention whatsoever of accepting the ideals of Western Christian civilization, but had purposes of their own. These purposes were accomplished not by direct military invasion, as President Monroe feared, but covertly by infiltration, propaganda, and electoral and financial pressures. The average American remained unaware and unperturbed. Among those who early foresaw the problems to be created by our new immigrants was General Eisenhower's immediate predecessor as president of Columbia University. In a small but extremely valuable book, The American as He Is, President Nicholas Murray Butler in 1908 called attention to the fact that Christianity in some of its many forms is a dominant part of the American nature. Butler, then at the zenith of his intellectual power, expressed fear that our capacity to subdue and assimilate the alien elements brought by immigration may soon be exhausted. He concluded accordingly that the dangers which confront America will come, if at all, from within. And how right he was. You can't import people into your country who are the total antithesis of everything that your society believes in, which was Western Christian civilization. We are Christian, we are white, we are European, and we're hard workers. We subdued the land, we subdued the frontier, we created all this, and people come in like, we're a nation of immigrants. No, we are not. We're a nation of pioneers and settlers. Immigrants came later. All right. After 1880, however, our immigration shifted sharply to include millions of persons from Southern and Eastern Europe. Oh, let me see here. No, I'm sorry. These purpose, let me see here. A large portion of them were non-Christians who had no intention whatever of accepting the ideals of Western Christian civilization, but had purposes of their own. These purposes were accomplished not by direct military invasion, as President Monroe feared, but covertly by infiltration, propaganda, and electoral and financial pressures. The average American remained unaware and unperturbed. Among those who early foresaw the problems to be created by our new immigrants was, dang, did I just read all this? Sorry. Oh, sorry, the dangers which will come, if at all, from within. Okay. Statistics afford ample reasons for President Butler's fears. The new immigration was comprised preponderantly of three elements: the Italians, the Slavs, and the Jews. The Italians and the Slavs were less assimilable than immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, and tended to congregate instead of distributing themselves over the whole country as earlier Northern European immigrants had usually done. The assimilation of Italians and Slavs was helped, however, by their belonging to the same parent Indo-Germanic racial stock as the English, German, Irish majority, and above all by their being Christians, mostly Roman Catholics, and therefore finding numerous co-religionists not only among fully Americanized second and third generation Irish Catholics, but among old stock Anglo-American Catholics descending from colonial days. Quite a few persons of Italian and Slavic stock were or became Protestants, chiefly Baptists, among them being ex-Governor Charles Paletti of New York and ex-Governor Harold Stassen of Minnesota. The new Italian and Slavic immigrants and their children soon began to marry among the old stock. In a protracted reading of an Italian language American newspaper, the author noted that approximately half of all recorded marriages of Italians were to persons with non-Italian names. Thus, in one way or another, the new Italian and Slavic immigrants began to merge into the general American pattern. This happened to some extent everywhere. It was notable in an area where the newcomers were not congregated, as in certain urban and mining areas, but were dispersed among people of native stock. With eventual complete assimilation by no means impossible, there was no need of a national conference of Americans and Italians or of Americans and Slavs to further the interests of those minorities. With the new Jewish immigrants, however, the developments were strikingly different and quite in line with the fears of President Butler. The handful of Jews, mostly Sephardic, and German already in this country, it's about 280,000 in 1877, were not numerous enough to contribute cultural guidance to the newcomers. These newcomers arrived in vast hordes, especially from territory under sovereignty of Russia. The total number of legally recorded immigrants from that country between 1881 and 1920 being about 3.2 million, most of them Jews. Many of those Jews referred to as Polish Jews because they came from that portion of Russia which had been the Kingdom of Poland prior to the partitions of 1772 to 1795, and was the Republic of Poland between the World War I and World War II. Accordingly, New York City's 2.5 million or more Jews are sometimes said to be largely Polish Jews. Thus, by sheer weight of numbers as well as by aggressiveness, the newcomer Jews from Eastern Europe pushed into the background the more and less westernized Jews who had migrated or whose ancestors had migrated to America prior to 1880 and had become, for the most part, popular and successful merchants with no inordinate interest in politics. In striking contrast, the Eastern European Jew made himself a power to be reckoned with in the professions, the industries, and the political parties. The overwhelming of the older Americanized Jews is well portrayed in The Jewish Dilemma by Elmer Berger. A book by Elmer Berger, okay. Of the earlier American Jews, Berger writes, most of the first 200,000 came from Germany. They integrated themselves completely. This integration was not difficult, for many persons of Jewish religion in Western Europe in the 19th century not only had no racial or ethnic connection with the Khazars, but were not separatists or Jewish nationalists. The old contentions of their ancestors with their Christian neighbors in Western Europe had been largely overlooked on both sides by the beginning of the 19th century, and nothing stood in the way of their full integration into Jewish life. The American kinsmen of these westernized Jews were similar in outlook, but after 1880, and particularly in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, immigration to the United States from Eastern Europe increased rapidly. The Eastern European immigrant Jews brought with them the worn-out concept of a Jewish people. Soon these newcomers of nationalist persuasion actually exerted influence on the old and once anti-nationalist organization of American Reform Judaism. In the winter of 1941-1942, the Central Conference of American Rabbis endorsed the campaign to organize a Jewish army. The event indicated the capitulation of the leadership of Reform Judaism to Jewish nationalism. Many American-minded Jews protested, but the voices were disorganized and therefore could be safely ignored. American Jewry had succumbed to the relentless pressure of the Zionists. With the domination of American Jewry by Judaized Khazars and those who traveled with them, the position of American Jews who wished to be Americans became most unhappy. The small but significant group, which met at Atlantic City in June 1942 to lay the foundations for an organization of Americans whose religion is Judaism, were at once pilloried. Charges of being traitors, quislings, betrayers, and were thundered from the synagogues of America and filled the columns of the Jewish press. Many were silenced or won over by the pressure and the abuse, but not all. Those brave Jews who are persecuted because they are not hostile to the American way of life should not be confused with those Jews who persecute them, as Mr. Berger shows, but should on the other hand receive sympathy of all persons who are trying to save Christian civilization in America. Since the predominant new Jews consider themselves a superior people, and a separate nationality, assimilation appears to now be out of the question. America now has virtually a nation within a nation, and an aggressive culture-conscious nation at that. The stream of Eastern Europeans was diminished in volume during World War I, but at flood level again in 1920. At last, the Congress became sufficiently alarmed to initiate action. The House Committee on Immigration, in its report on the bill that later became the Quota Law of 1921, reported, quote, "There is a limit to our power of assimilation, the processes of which assimilation and amalgamation are slow and difficult. With the population of the broken parts of Europe headed this way in ever-increasing numbers, why not peremptorily check the stream with this temporary measure, and in the meantime try the unique and novel experiment of enforcing all of the immigration laws on our statutes. End quote. Accordingly, the 67th Congress passed the first quota law, which was approved on May 19, 1921, limiting the number of any nationality entering the United States to 3% of foreign-born of that nationality who lived here in 1910. Under this law, approximately 350,000 aliens were permitted to enter each year, mostly from Northern and Western Europe. The worry of Congress over the unassimilated aliens continued, and the House Committee on Immigration and Naturalization of the 68th Congress reported that it was necessary to the successful future of our nation to preserve the basic strain of our population, and continued as follows, quote, "Since it is the axiom of political science that a government not imposed by external force is the visible expression of the ideals, standards, and social viewpoint of the people over which it rules, it is obvious that a change in the character or composition of the population must inevitably result in the evolution of a form of government consonant with the base upon which it rests. If, therefore, the principle of individual liberty, guarded by a constitutional government created on this continent nearly a century and a half ago, is to endure, the basic strain of our population must be maintained and our economic standards preserved. The American people do not concede the rights of any foreign group in the United States or government abroad to demand a participation in our possessions, tangible or intangible, or to dictate the character of our legislation." End quote. Amen. Wow. The new law changed the quota basis from 1910 to 1890, reduced the quotas from 3 to 2%, provided for the establishment of permanent quotas on the basis of national origin, and placed the burden of proof on the alien with regard to his admissibility and the legality of his residence in the United States. It was passed by the Congress on May 15th and signed by President Calvin Coolidge on May 26, 1924. I need to look at some more of that because that's pretty interesting because, you can't think that you're going to have the same type of government that our founding fathers created for us by changing the people and making it all African. You're not going to make the United States darker from people from third world countries and then expect to keep the same government. It's just not going to happen. Anyway, let's see here. The new quota system was still more favorably relatively to the British Isles and Germany and other countries of Northern and Western Europe, and excluded persons who believe in or advocate the overthrow by force or violence of the government of the United States. Unfortunately, within 10 years, this salutary law was to be largely nullified by misinterpretation of its intent and by continued scandalous maladministration, a principal worry of the Congress, as shown above in 1921 and continuously since. By birth and by immigration, either clandestine or in violation of the intent of the National Origins Law of 1924, the Jewish populations of the U.S. increased rapidly. The following official Census Bureau statement is of interest. In 1887, there were at least 277 congregations in the country and 230,000 Jews. In 1890, there was 533 congregations and probably 475,000 Jews. Let me see here. And then we get on to 1936, you got 3,700 congregations and 4.6 million Jews residing in the cities, towns, and villages in which the congregations were located. On other religions, the latest government statistics are mostly for the year 1947, but for the Jews, the 1936 figure remains. As to the total number of Jews in the United States, the government has no exact figures, any precise figures beyond a vague over 5 million being impossible because of incomplete records and illegal immigration. The Committee on the Judiciary of the Senate, however, accepts the World Almanac figure of 15.7 Jews of religious affiliation in the world and summarizes thus. Statistics indicate that over 50% of the world Jewish population is now residing in the Western Hemisphere, that is at least 8 million. Since some 3/4 of a million Jews live in other North and South American countries besides the United States, the number of Jews known to be in the United States may be placed at a minimum of about 7.2 million. Jews unaffiliated with organizations whose members are counted illegal entrants, etc., may place the total number in the neighborhood of 10 million. This likely figure would justify the frequently heard statements that more than a half of the Jews of the world are in the United States. Percentage-wise, this is a government summary of Jewish population in the United States. Quote, in 1937, Jews constituted less than 4% of the American people, but during the 7-year period following, net Jewish immigration to the United States ranged between 25 and 77% of total net immigration to this country. For the 36-year period between 1908 and 1943, net Jewish immigration constituted 14% of the total. The population of the United States has increased threefold since 1877, while the Jewish population has increased 21-fold during the same period. The above, end quote. The above government figures require elucidation. The figures include only those Jews connected with an organized Jewish congregation, and as a corollary exclude the vast number of Jews, illegal entrants, and others who are not so connected and hence not officially listed as Jews. The stated increase of Jews by 2,100% since 1877 is thus far too small because non-congregational Jews are not counted. Moreover, since the increase of 300% in the total population, Moreover, since the increase of 300% of the total population includes known Jews who increase at the rate of 2,100%, the increase in population of non-Jews is far less than the 300% increase of the total population. This powerful and rapidly growing minority, closely knit and obsessed with its own objectives, which are not those of Western Christian civilization, will in subsequent chapters be discussed along with other principal occupants of the stage of public affairs in America during the early 1950s. Details will come as a surprise to many readers who were unwitting victims of censorship. Valuable for its light on the global projects of political Zionism, with a special reference to Africa, is Douglas Reed's Somewhere South of Suez. After mentioning that the secret ban against publishing the truth on Zionist nationalism, which holds to be allied in its root to Soviet communism, has grown in his adult lifetime from nothing into something approaching a law of less majest at some absolute court of the dark past. Mr. Reed states further that Zionist nationalists are powerful enough to govern governments in the countries of the remaining West. He concludes that He concludes further that American presidents and British prime ministers and all their colleagues bow to Zionism as if venerating a shrine. The subject matter of a book can be best determined not by its preface but by its index. It is believed that an examination of the index of the Iron Curtain over America will show a unique completeness in the listing of names and subjects bearing upon an important peril of our country. In brief, the Iron Curtain over America presents in complete detail, along with other matters, the problems created in the United States by a powerful minority possessed of an ideology alien to our traditions and fired by an ambition which threatens to involve us in the ruin of a third worldwide war. The next chapter deals with the above-board infiltration of Judaizers, Khazars, and other persons of the same ideology into the United States Democratic Party. Okay, and that was chapter 2 of the Iron Curtain over America. Thanks for listening. I'm going to post 3 up here soon and just keep it going. Peace.